Hello, my dear students. Today we are going to learn the chapter The Address, which is written by Marga Minco. In this story, we get to see the Holland War, which happened during World War II. In 1942, Germans invaded Holland. Dutch Jews were mercilessly persecuted. Between 1940 to 1941, Jews were removed, their properties were sold to non Jews, Jewish people were arrested, life of Dutch people became harder. They left places for safety, the public services broke down, there was no transport, no electricity, no phone communication, etc. And there was widespread of diseases at large scale that had happened because of excessive killing. The story that is there in our syllabus, that is the address, shows fundamental dilemma whether to cling to the memories of the past or forget it and reconcile with the present. It also shows that war affects life terribly and dislocated refugees rarely comes back. These native people find themselves as a stranger in familiar surroundings. Moving towards the story, we will get few details about the Jewish writer Sarah Menko, whose pen name is Marga Minco. Here, the author is Marga Minco, but this is pen name of Sarah Menko. Because of printing mistake, her name was changed to Marga Minco. Alright, there is slight change in vowel which is done by the printer, and since then she is known by Marga Minco. She was born on 31st March 1920 in Ginneken, Netherlands. Marga Minco was a Dutch journalist. In 1942, her parents were forced to move into the city's Jewish quarter. The parents, her brother, and sister were all evicted, and Sarah or Marga managed to survive the war in hiding. Thus, her stories often revolve around existential problems often faced by survivors. And the same is seen in the story, very specifically in the address. Let's see more details about the story. In order to understand the story, the address, we need to understand the background of it. Let us see in which background the story was written. Here, the story takes us to our history, our world history, where World War II was being held. World War II ran its course from 1939 to 1945. Most of the nations of the world divided themselves into two groups, the Allies and the Axis. These were the two eminent powers during World War. This is known to each and everyone, I guess, and I don't have to explain that who all were there in Allies party and who all were there in Axis party. This we have already read in history, right? Here, we just need to understand that there were numerous powers because of which this devastation had taken place. It was not only one-sided, but from both the sides, excessive powers were used and there was utmost destruction in World War II. And here, extreme merciless act was done by Hitler in Germany. What was that? We will see. Here, let's see all those points under the heading Consequences of War. Here we know, students, that war never does good to anyone. The parties which are engaged in war, even if they are victorious, they lose property, people, and finally, even if the treaty is conducted, at that time, maximum damage will have already taken place. Therefore, war should be avoided, and this is the message which we see in class 12's chapter, Keeping Quiet, as well. Okay, so let's come to the point out here. The most devastating aspects of this war, that is World War II, were the Holocaust and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Holocaust is not unknown to anyone. Everybody knows this inhuman act which was done by Hitler, right? The Holocaust was the genocide or mass killing of people of about 6 million European Jews under the Nazi reign of Adolf Hitler. The Holocaust began with laws being established to remove Jews from civil society. They were sent to concentration camps and used as labor or for medical experiments unto death. Often mass shootouts took lives. Some were, some were sent to extermination camps by freight train to be killed in the now infamous gas chambers. Here, students, everybody knows about Holocaust and how Jewish people were deprived of their property and they were planned to remove from society entirely. And this was done by, it is said by the historians, because of the personal grudge of Adolf Hitler towards Jewish people. Students, the result, the impact of the war was written in different books by different people. Some were found after their death, and their relatives printed it, and now the world knows about their lives where they had to move from one place to another secretly in order to save their lives. And such examples are here. The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, Sarah's Key by Tatiana de Rosny, The Boy in the Striped Pajama by John Boyne, and movies such as Schindler's List. All these shows the life of Jewish people. So, the torture of the concentration camps, the loss of loved ones left a painful, everlasting impact. And this is correct. Those who have lost their beloved people in war, they are irreplaceable. None of the other members are going to take their place. So here, the pain, the ache of separation is evident. The narrator's observation of the light-colored bread, familiar views, and unthreatened sleep implies the coarse, stale food of the camps. The view of barren lands and barbed wires, and a sleep forever threatened with pain and death. Here, in the story, we learn that the narrator compares the days during the war and the days after the war. So here she explains how was the food during their tragic period, okay, and how was it after the war was over. But the food might get better, but the lost lives could not be taken back in their life again. This we will understand when we read the chapter once. Let's move ahead. Let's discuss the characters. Here we find 4 characters. Mrs. S, okay, it is just S, alright. Mrs. S daughter, that is narrator, Mrs. Dorling, and Mrs. Dorling's daughter. Here, directly Mrs. S is not present. Okay, whenever narrator remembers her mother, that is Mrs. S, then we get to know about her person in the story. Let's begin with the story. After ringing the doorbell of Mrs. Dorling, who lived at number 46 Marconi Street, the protagonist was given a cold reception, and Mrs. Dorling took much time to recognize her. Here, students, the story opens when the narrator arrives at Mrs. Dorling's gate. Okay, and when she opens the gate, when Mrs. Dorling opens the gate, she happens to see the narrator, and she pretends that she does not recognize her. She gives cold reception. Okay, this shows that what was there in Mrs. Dorling's mind. Let's see the next point. Mrs. Dorling had thought everyone in the protagonist's family was dead and asked if anyone else had come along with her. Here, one question arises that if she did not recognize her, then how can she ask a question about somebody else coming along with the narrator? Okay. Here we see that Mrs. Dorling was hiding something to the narrator. And narrator, who was a very simple girl, she thought that she had come to wrong place. Mrs. Dorling refused to let the protagonist inside her home and told her to come back sometimes later. Here, narrator had arrived to Mrs. Dorling's house and she had some purpose. Okay? She had some work with Mrs. Dorling's, and Mrs. Dorling's also knew what was that work. But she had she was of wicked mindset, therefore she denied to recognize her. Usually, when somebody comes to our gate, we accept them inside our house. But even though she knew this girl, she did not let her get inside her house. The protagonist recognized her mother's green cardigan, which Mrs. Dorling was wearing. Here, protagonist was about to leave, thinking that she had come to a wrong address. But when she looked at the sweater of Mrs. Dorling's, she remembered that this sweater was of her mother. Then she understood that she had come to a correct address. She decided to go back to the train station and thought about her mother and how she told her about Mrs. Dorling. Now here it takes us to past incidents, okay? Here in past what had happened when narrator's mother was alive, okay? When narrator's mother was alive, at that point of time, mother had told her that Mrs. Dorling is transporting entire antique items and entire other expensive items from Mrs. S house, okay, to hers, Mrs. house to hers, because she wanted to safeguard it. Now, why safeguard it? Let me tell you. She wanted to safeguard because Mrs. S were Jews. Okay, they were Jewish family. Therefore, Adolf Hitler wanted to kill entire entity of Jewish citizens. Therefore, Mrs. Dorlings willingly said that she is going to keep safe the entire items of Mrs. S. Therefore, she had taken each and everything from the house of Mrs. S to hers. Okay, this was the reason. But right now, when narrator explains that she was wearing green cardigan, the readers comes to know that she was not safeguarding it, but she was using it. Okay, she had started using the items of Mrs. S. Not only that, she avoided accepting the recognition of the protagonist. Dorling, who was an acquaintance of hers during the war, Mrs. Dorling would visit their house and take their possessions with her as she didn't want them to get lost if they ever left the place. Here, let me tell you that if the German troops kill Mrs. Dorlings and her daughter, then she did not want all these expensive things to be taken over by somebody else. Therefore, she said that she is going to safeguard all the belongings. Okay, but she knew that girls, both the ladies are going to die in the war. Here we see inhumanity of Mrs. Dorlings. Being a human, she should think about the safety of mother and daughter. But instead of helping, what she did, she ditched them. Okay, she ditched them. Therefore, we can say that Mrs. Dorling was cunning and wicked lady. The protagonist decided to go to Mrs. Dorling's home to get back their belongings. Here, when she remembered her mother, she became overwhelmed. Now, she thought that she should go once again to that particular address. Students, remember the narration of this story is not linear. Okay, sometimes she explains the incident that had happened in past, and sometimes she comes to the present. So in that way you need to understand. At first, what you have seen in this story, that she had come to Mrs. Dorling's house. Okay, and while going back to the station for train, she remembered her mother's words that this is the address and here she will find Mrs. Dorling's. If anything happens to her, she should take the belongings from Mrs. Dorling's. For that purpose, she had come also. But because of a cold reception, she did not feel like going inside her house. Okay, rather, she was not allowed by Mrs. Dorlings. So, when she remembered this, she again wanted to come back and try once again. This time, she was fortunate and somebody else opened the door. Who was she? Let us find out. When she rang the bell, Mrs. Dorling's daughter answered the door. She let her in and asked her to wait in the living room. Here we see Mrs. Dorling's daughter was not like her. She allowed the protagonist or the narrator to come inside and sit in the living room. Here we can say that Mrs. Dorling's daughter was hospitable and open minded compared to her mother. When they were crossing the passage, the protagonist noticed their Hanukkah candle stand that they had never used because it had been unmanageable. Here, when protagonist entered, she encountered one and the other things which belonged to her some time. Okay, the first thing that she noticed was Hanukkah, a candle stand. Okay, Hanukkah means candle stand which has multiple candle holders. Okay, it was so large, therefore, they did not use it. When she reached the living room, she was horrified as she saw all her mother's things that were arranged in a tasteless manner. Here, protagonist had never thought that Mrs. Dorlings is going to do is going to ditch them. Okay, she plainly thought that Mrs. Dorlings going to keep all the belongings safe, but when she saw that all her mother's things were being used by this lady, she became so much horrified and she became very much disheartened as well because it was a breach of trust. Here, not only that, the way those things were arranged that made her remember her mother more because mother was a very she was a lady who knew how to arrange the things. She knew how to do household chores. She knew how to arrange things. She was a very good homemaker, if we want to say in one word. The furniture was ugly and the room had a muggy smell, and it made her disinterested and she wanted to leave the place. Here, when she happened to see all the items of her mother, she became so much disinterested. Now she did not want all these items back. First of all, these items were not arranged properly. Number two, those were not taken care properly, just like her mother. In the story, we see occasionally Mrs. S used to clean the items. Okay, she used to instruct her daughter into it. She used to ask her to clean it whenever she used to get holiday. All right, but here she found the room was not appropriate for those expensive antique items and those were not taken care properly by this family member. That is why she had become very much sad. Mrs. Dorling's daughter offered her cup of tea, and the protagonist noticed the old tablecloth that had a burn mark on it. Here, when she encountered each and every item, she remembered the story related to that. Okay, here, when she sat on the tablecloth that they had used to cover the table was of Mrs. S and her daughter because there was a burn mark which showed the identity of that tablecloth. And after some time, she found that burn mark and it was confirmed that that particular item was of Mrs. S. Let's move ahead. When the girl was showing her the silver fork and spoons that actually belonged to the protagonist, she jumped up and walked out of the house. Here she was not able to tolerate the room anymore because she knew each and everything and she could not say even a word. Okay, the cutlery items were used, decorative items were used. Okay, and the lady, the daughter of Mrs. Mrs. Dorling's daughter did not have any knowledge about it regarding the true owner of all these items. Therefore, she became more disheartened. She decided not to visit the place again as it brought back memories of the past, and hence she decided to forget the address. Now, after the visit of her second time, she thought that it is useless because even if she will get all those items back to her room, she is going to remember her mother. She is going to compare her mother's way of arranging these things, her mother's love towards all these items, and how distastefully the lady, okay, the wicked, cunning lady, had used these items. That too in very distasteful manner. Not only that, what hurt her more was that she was not happy. Mrs. Dorlings was not happy because the protagonist was alive. Okay, usually after the war, if somebody sees somebody alive, then they should be happy. Moreover, she was never of Mrs. S and her daughter. Therefore, she should be happy, but she turned cold shoulder to her. This made her extremely sad. Therefore, she decided to go back to her rented room. She remembered her mother very much, and she knew that these items can be taken back, but not mother. And all these items are going to remind her of her mother now and then. All right. Therefore, she thought that it will be very unpleasant if she will take all these items back to her room, because all these items will not bring the wonderful memories of her mother, but she will remind all these items will remind her the treachery of Mrs. Dorlings. Therefore, she left all those items there, and without saying a word, she left the room. Students, let's see what we learn from this story. The story brings to light that as soon as we accept something and move on in life, the better we are bound to feel. Here, what we get to see is that the narrator reconciles quickly with the present. She knew that mother cannot be brought back at any cost. Therefore, she reconciled with present and she moved on in life. Next message is accepting something not only makes us feel better emotionally, it also helps us to concentrate on the opportunities that might come on way in the not so distant future. Here, if we won't leave our painful past, then we cannot see the wonderful future as well. Therefore, in order to lead in happy and satisfied life, we need to forget our tragic memories as well. Next message is the story gives the message to live peacefully and sympathize with those who are war victims. Here, let me talk about this war. War will never be initiated by civilians or common people. Okay, they are initiated by people who are in power. Therefore, innocent people are the one who gets victimized. All right. Therefore, after the war, if somebody comes in front of you, then we should sympathize with them, because this is what we can do to them. They might have lost their property, they might have lost their beloved ones. Okay, so what we can do, if we can listen to their words and comfort them accordingly, then it will be humanistic than anything else. Not to elevate the sufferings of others as Mrs. Dollings did. She further added the narrator's pain. She added to the narrator's pain by not returning her mother's belongings. Here, what we get to see is that the narrator, who was already suffering a lot by losing her mother in the war, we see that Mrs. Dollings added to her sufferings more. Here, Mrs. Dollings could have asked her to stay with them because narrator was also alone and she was staying in a rented house. But she did not do that. In greed, she had denied the identity of the narrator, and this is very painful. Therefore, we should sympathize with these victims if we cannot do anything else. So, these are the messages that we learn from this story. Students, by this we have completed the chapter, the address. I hope it is clear to you all. Let me know if any doubt is there. Thank you, everyone.